Welcome back, everyone. And I say back because hopefully you've been here since, well, for us, 3 a.m. This morning, Swedish time, for this edition of Q&A live with my good friend, Emil Eifrém, CEO and founder of Neo4j. Emil, how are you feeling?
Better than this morning. As you alluded to at the end of last session, my lovely daughter gave me her not so lovely flu this week. So I've not been great. There were a couple of cough fits on the last session, but I'm feeling slightly better this evening.
I'm very glad that is true.
The gradient descent is positive.
Yes, you're headed in the right way. That's very good. And headed in the right way, just much like the industry.
Oh, well said.
Segue.
The poet.
So we're now through 2/3 of nodes. It's been an amazing, nodes, as it always is. And as probably you all have experienced, it's like as you go through all the sessions, there's probably like 2 sessions at a time you want to view. You can't maybe be at both of them. Don't worry, everything's being recorded. Everything's going to end up on YouTube eventually, so you can catch up on any material you missed, either because it was at the same time or in a different time zone that maybe didn't quite work out for you. Now, 2/3 of the way through, it's still true that it's a lot of content about AI, about graph rag, about knowledge graphs, as we would expect in this community, and that's amazing and perfect. And there's kind of like a meta trend I want to ask you about actually to start this Q&A. And as I'm asking this question, please, in the chat, enter your questions there. I'll relay them to Emil. So Emil, there's been recently chatter, I guess I will say, about are we in an AI bubble the way that we were in a .com bubble before, and like now there's an overinvestment in AI, and maybe even for like, products like Neo4j, like over indexing into like, oh, we're doing a bunch of AI stuff, and like, well, what about the core business and the database? What's your take on all of that? How, like for the company, for the industry?
Yeah. So lots of chatter about this, which is very natural because it's at the early stage of this cycle and the technology is absolutely new and magical, and there's so much hype and buzz around it, and deservedly so, because the capabilities that it unlocks, it's just amazing, right? But I think there's certainly some weird things going on. I think as graph people, like we easily see through what's going on with all these cyclical investments you see up there between NVIDIA this and OpenAI that and AMD and Microsoft, and are they just recycling money in some kind of a DAG thing, right? And we could obviously see through that easily. But it shouldn't hide the fact that this technology is immensely valuable. We see it, we feel it. We see it internally, we see it personally, we see it with our customers, right? And ultimately, that's what we end up focusing on, trying to ensure that folks like you all can build really valuable things with AI. And internally, I always talk about it as, this is the year, I'm going to make up a number, 1997, and it's the birth of the internet. Of course, there's going to be a lot of attempts at using AI that will fall flat. There's going to be pets.com or whatever, things that just did not work out, that were just the wrong idea, or maybe more accurately, like probably the right idea but too early, right? Like pets.com is an example of that, right? So that is going to happen. But amongst all those new customers, new use cases, there's also going to be Amazons and eBays and so on and so forth, right? And I think our job there as tool builders is, okay, just give you all the best possible tool chain to build the most amazing use cases that you can. And that is what we're staying focused on.
I think that's beautifully said. I think broadly, I absolutely agree with all of your points there. And probably, and you and I have discussed this on asides, before, that kind of along with the AI bubble, there's this notion of like, are we hitting a data wall? And like, what's the implications of that? And, the scaling laws, are those running out? And, whatever trends people kind of think about. And we come back around to the point, like, even if the foundation models don't improve at all, like, okay, this is it, they've plateaued. The engineering to take that and apply that usefully across industries, across use cases, will go on for years, even at the current capabilities. So we don't need any advances like OpenAI, that they have their own concerns to figure out their business model, but like the models exist. There are open source models that are more capable today than ChatGPT 3.5 was, or certainly the earlier ones. And so even with the current technology, years of AI engineering to do, and we know that there's benefits there, even with that level of capability. And so now I'm going to ask this kind of follow-on question, like what are some of the day-to-day benefits, like even like within engineering here that we see, and I'm sure that people experience around this as well, like within Neo4j, how is AI changing how we go about doing things?
Yeah, I think it's a spectrum of a thing. Like with most companies, we see pockets of very, very deep adoption, and then like pockets where, okay, we're trying, but the tools or the applications haven't yet clicked with that, with that persona, with the key use cases, with kind of the real business goals that they're trying to achieve. Obviously, software engineering is on one side of the spectrum, right? We've seen kind of the impact of, choose your favorite Claude Code or OpenAI Codex, right? Look at Cognition, look at like all of the kind of the new IDEs and the entire kind of tool chain supporting the software engineer. And I think that's a very early kind of breakout use case outside of consumer. And then I just think that there's a lot of people using generically kind of ChatGPT, Claude, just for any kind of knowledge work. And that certainly we see across any group in the org.
And this is maybe a little bit surprising. It was surprising to me, I should say, like sometimes when I have conversations out at conferences or in different engagements with folks commercially at companies and otherwise, that sometimes people will ask not just about the technology, like how do I do GraphRag, how do I construct a knowledge graph? For sure, those conversations happen. But then there's sometimes a deeper question where change management in an organization comes up, like, okay, we're an established business. We know we have a bit of FOMO about we need to do stuff with AI. And putting aside even the proof of concept work, like how do we introduce this into our organization and get a range of people in different departments all moving forward? Is it necessary? How do you go about doing it? Like, how did you approach that at Neo4j?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I tend to talk to leaders about a lot, right? And one of the things that I've done is I've put together this presentation which talks through kind of the organizational transformation required, and you can Google it. The first time that I presented it was, I think, at the Human X conference. You can Google kind of Human X Emil Eifrém or Human X Neo4j or something like that on YouTube, and you'll find it. But I think there's a couple of things, right? One is you want to create a culture of fluency with AI tools, and I think that starts at the top, right? Like I don't think you're credible as a leader if you yourself don't know how to use them. You can't be an expert at everything. I'm certainly not an expert at all the AI tools out there, but I'm a very frequent user of a broad range of tools, and with some real spikes of tools that I go kind of very deep on. So that's kind of the first one. And then I think having real bottom-up adoption tends to be absolutely critical. This cannot be one of those things where you push it from above. You say, you all have to use AI, right?
Mandates,
Exactly, right? It has to come from the bottom, but supported with air cover from the top. So those are kind of a couple of the things.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. And thinking of advice, I'm going to actually pick up one of the questions from the audience. I'll ask it in a slightly different way here, but when you had that fireside chat with Andrew Ng, and it's been broadcast now twice, it'll, I think, come up later in about an hour again, Andrew had a lot of interesting advice about adoption and enterprise and how to think about these things. And this question here from our good friend Michael actually is about, that conversation with Andrew. And it's like, were you surprised by anything you learned, in that conversation with Andrew Ng? Because he mentioned at some point, every conversation he has with people, whether it's an interview with a candidate or whatever it might be, he learns from just conversations with other people that are peers or wherever it is. Like, did you learn from your conversation with him?
Yeah. So first of all, it was a very interesting conversation. He's a very thoughtful guy, and he's unusually broad. He's not just a professor of AI, right? Like, he's had his hand in a wide variety of initiatives and is able to learn kind of horizontally. I think a couple of things that I don't know if they surprised me, but that I really enjoyed. Obviously, he was very, very intrinsically enthusiastic about graphs, where I didn't want this to be like a graph sales pitch or anything like that. And being at his heart an academic, he would never do that anyway. For sure. So I just asked him kind of generic questions. But as you all heard, if you've watched the interview, and if not, it's coming up again in an hour-ish, he very naturally went to, man, this is where graphs are so beneficial, right? And he's a real user of graphs, of Neo4j, and very happy and sees it as a really important tool in his tool belt. So that was really fantastic. So that's the first one. I think the second one is he spoke to the value of data across silos. And this is such a clear pattern that I'm seeing right now, where it is the companies that are successful with AI, they are able to take their data for a particular use case. What is the key data that is required? Get that data out across the various silos into some kind of an integration layer, right? And we call it a knowledge layer. You can call it a knowledge graph or a knowledge graph layer. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but it is a unified, consistent layer of data where Andreas Kollegger and ABK and Andreas Benno Kollegger, we've unified and made sure that that is the same individual, even if it's called one thing in Salesforce, another thing in Marketo, and a third thing in Churn Zero, for example, right? And he spoke very passionately about the power of correlating and relating data across silos. I think his example was sometimes your sales forecasts are impacted by weather, like ice cream, for example, right? And then being able to correlate your kind of data out of your weather database with kind of your sales database is really powerful, right? And this I see reflected very much in our customer base as well. So I think those were a couple of the takeaways at least.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like if you all haven't seen the sit down, the fireside chat with Emil and Andrew, it's a really lovely chat. It's two of my favorite people in technology, talking about two of my favorite topics in technology, graphs and AI. So if you're graph folks and you're AI folks,
for you.
It's optimized. I'm the audience for sure. Hopefully some of you are the audience as well. I think you should definitely take the time to watch it. There's been a lot of good chatter here in the chat, and I want to try to pick up some of the questions and see if I can do them some justice. And and actually you're started to hint at this a little bit in like how we model graphs and how we think about graphs and the different parts of the graph that exist. And we've kind of started to define within our knowledge graph construction the idea of a lexical graph and a domain graph. And then, how do you connect those things together? And there's this tension between what I think is one of the great advantages of Neo4j, the kind of schema-free nature of it, that it starts off like open-ended. You can do anything with it, right? And I think particularly like with discovery of content within documents, for instance, it's incredibly powerful to like go in and first like maybe not have some idea or some predetermination about what you should get from the documents. Let the documents speak with what they have, and then maybe curate that and then kind of refine it over time. That's been something that we've always talked about, evolving a graph model. And on the other hand, there's this tension with like, well, but we need to have some ontology, people will say, which is a graph schema. We all know that here in the community, of course, a schema, a formal way of describing what's in the graph. Do you have any ideas on like, that tension and like, what is the right balance of like when to introduce formal definitions of things? How necessary is that? Is it, informative? What's your perspective on it?
Well, as always, I think you laid it out really well with that tension, and there's value in both sides of that spectrum, which tends to be the case when you have tension like this. Otherwise, you would just drive to one end of the extreme, right?
Yeah.
But like in this case, both are really valuable in many situations, right? What I will say, maybe I'll pop it up at the kind of highest level. I think there are two key trends that are pushing us as a company, Neo4j as a company, and the Neo4j product in the distinct direction of being able to handle schemas, data models, ontologies, call it whatever you want to, in a better way. And those two things are, 5 years ago, when I talked to customers, the normal big Global 2000 enterprise would have maybe a single use case in production, right? And it would be a fraud detection, project, or a customer journey, or data lineage, or something like this, right? Today, when I talk to customers, a couple of months ago, we had Graph Summit in London. I know you couldn't be there. You were we were at you had a graphathon, I think, at the same time.
That's right. Yeah.
I met with a handful of customers. Every single one of them, every single one of the formal sit-downs I had, they had more than 10 projects in production, right?
Yeah.
And these are some of the biggest banks, biggest telcos, biggest this and that, biggest life science companies, right? And so graphs are really taking off inside of these companies, right? If you think about the view of a schema or a data model or an ontology, if the scope is a single project, really that data model is defined by your code.
Yep.
You've already expressed that in your Ruby, your Python, your Java, your Go, your whatever it might be, right? And that is the canonical reference for your domain model. And then we have the schema-free nature, and it's really powerful. And of course, I've always talked of us as schema optional, right? And so you can add labels, and you can apply some constraints, and we want to add and build out more of those so that if there's a person label, they have to have a social security number, or else the database will reject it, that kind of thing, right? But ultimately, it is owned by the programming language layer. It's owned by programming language constructs in the application layer of that project. As we are becoming more broadly used across use cases, and sometimes we see people deploying enterprise-wide knowledge graphs where they hang multiple use cases off of the same graph, now all of a sudden, it is very beneficial for you to be able to have tangible, this is what the data model is, this is what the ontology is, this is what the schema is, right? And so that's the first trend. The second trend is how you led into this question, which is going from unstructured data into structured data using, for example, the knowledge graph builder or something like this, where you have, what was your example, like your PDF files, right? And you want to be able to extract knowledge out of that into a lexical graph, into a domain graph, right? And I think, and what we've learned is that if you give just a little bit of hints to the LLM, it'll provide a much higher quality knowledge graph for you automatically. There's a great course on deeplearning.ai with ABK and Andrew Ng teaching you how to do some of this amazing
some of the
stuff.
magic, yep.
Yeah, some of the magic, right? And so both of these trends, I think I know it's pushing us more in the direction of being able to provide better first-class facilities for doing data modeling inside of the product. So that is probably a long-winded answer, but I thought that's useful context for the overall community to understand one aspect of where we're going with the product.
Yeah. And I think you framed it really well. And like, I think in Neo4j's history, the way we've been very methodical and I will say almost conservative in like, we change the model, we evolve the capabilities based on what's useful. We don't kind of like purely just for kind of an for theoretical or like, you know, hey, this seems like a neat idea. We don't just do neat stuff or interesting stuff. Like, okay, where's the real utility here? Is this necessary? And then we'll start to, you know, bring in new features, bring in new skills. With a core that I think, of course, is already extremely powerful, simply by being a graph, an open-ended graph, you can do so many things already, and it's incredible. Cool. I do want to get to a few other questions. Actually, this has come up a few times, and so I want to get to this. And it's perfect for Nodes. So Nodes, this is a global conference, right? It's been going on since 3 a.m. Swedish time. It'll continue until 2 a.m. Swedish time, when maybe me, but maybe not you. We'll come back. We'll see. And as a global community, one thing that comes up with AI and with LLMs is a question around, okay, so much of it is English language based. We have all these other languages. You know, okay, yes, if you have Chinese models, they'll be good at Chinese, and that's really great. But what about all the other world languages? You know, how do you accommodate those? And maybe I'll start on this, and you can chime in a little bit if you want to. And there's two ways, I guess, really to address this as a concern. One is that the knowledge graph itself, again, because it's, you know, schema optional, you can frame anything you want to. However you think about your domain, in whatever language you think about your domain, you can craft the knowledge graph to fit that in any language, and it's agnostic to that. It doesn't make a difference for us. The bigger challenge is really, of course, on the model side, and it probably was true in earlier generations of GPT that it was not, you know, multilingual. The more modern frontier models are pretty good at most languages, and then beyond that, really, I think where the bigger challenge ends up being is on the embedding side. That when you're, you know, calculating vector embeddings for some chunk of text, you want a model that is tuned to that language so that the vector space is appropriately, you know, semantically appropriate for that language. And for that, there are many open source models that you can find that are going to get you good coverage there, or frontier models that you can look for. And actually, rather than me just kind of iterating some of the links here, just Googling for it, you'll find models that are available open source that you can adopt for those purposes. So either just use that model entirely. So whether it's a frontier model that has good multi-language skills, or for a particular language, you can find well-trained models for it. There's a technology, slightly older technology, but still highly relevant, called BERT. You will find kind of fine-tuned BERTs for particular domains, for particular languages. So whether that is medical terminology or it is, you know, Farsi, you can find a BERT that knows how to do Farsi, very likely. So go Google for that. That's the right way to go down. Does that sound about right for like how to think about international languages?
Yeah, well said. By the way, in the early days, like maybe a year ago or so, like when Quen got onto the scene, there were some really interesting examples where, because was it Quen or maybe it was R1, where you could see kind of the chain of thought. They provide visibility, and you could see that the model thought in Chinese.
Right.
But it got like a question in English, and then it dropped down, and as it processed it, it thought in Chinese, and then like a Mandarin, I guess. And then it translated it back to English in order to give the appropriate response. I think that's just a fascinating look into the inside of these models.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so cool. And I guess I want to touch on it in a minute. If you'll pardon the aside, like the intersection of work that's happening in AI these days on the frontier, which is still improving. The models are changing. Lots of new research for hierarchical models. Some of them are graph models. And like, if I think about the dynamic that happened when we went from question answering models to reasoning models, some of that came from prompting techniques, right? Like chain of thought was not something that started on the model side. It started on a prompting technique. Hey, here's how you can induce, a chain of thought, have a model do a better job at thinking about things if you just use this prompt. And then that became part of like also then a training regime, and then the models became better at the chain of thought because of that. And it feels like, and this is really a call of action almost maybe to the community, I would say, that so much of the work that's happening in the AI engineering community, and you all now are part of that community, you're going to be trying out new techniques, new approaches for how to get better at a particular thing you're trying to do. And that thing you're trying to do now, maybe by hand, by like prompting techniques, context engineering, as we're talking about these days, is actually AI. And it is genuinely like, okay, you're pushing what is possible with the models, and that some of that's going to find its way into the model side. And now I'm going to get a little, kind of hand wavy as I'm waving my hand about my question for you. And there's, for all industries, but I'll talk about databases, as we are evolving how we use the models and the models learn from what we've done. And again, I'll say there's some tension between, are we just hastening our own demise? Like as a database, are we like helping models become so good at database work that, oh, they don't need a database anymore? Do you feel like that's a risk for Neo4j? Are you worried that, ChatGPT might one day be like, why do you need a graph database at all? Just let me.
Well, let me answer it in the following way. I think ChatGPT will sooner replace CEOs than it will replace databases, right? And I'm looking forward to that, honestly. That'd be great, especially when you have the flu.
Then you can finally just sleep without interruption. Yeah.
No, I think, look, Satya Nadella is like the GOAT in so many ways, right? And he had a great quote at the end of last year on a podcast, December 2024, when he spoke about kind of the core bill of material for kind of future software. He said every AI application is going to need a model, a Kubernetes cluster, and a database. And really what I think when he says Kubernetes cluster, I think he means compute, somewhere to kind of run compute, right? And of course, as you and I have talked about many times, is a model or plural, several models. But these really are the four components, like an application, right? And that application can consist of one or multiple agents, right? It's a model or several models. It's some form of compute. He called it a Kubernetes cluster. And it's a database to store your data, to store your state. I think that it's a very safe bet that is the core bill of material for any kind of future of software that we can foresee right now, at least.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense as a kind of high-level architecture over this. That absolutely makes sense. When I've thought about this and had conversations, I go two directions with it. One is there are many things you can do with the model, of course, but it would be wasteful, let's say, to ask the model to keep track of the state of, is that light on or off? Okay, managing state, saving state, persisting state is not something like, is the light on or off? Why would you ask the LLM that? That is incredibly inefficient. Like, there's still going to be state external to the LLM. That is going to be the reality of the world. And shared state, even more important, is this couch blue or is it red? Or I don't know about the color shifting in the video equipment. Maybe it's gold. I don't know. We'll put that aside. But assume that it has a ground truth in reality. And even if an LLM, if the models get super, super good at not hallucinating, that agreement, consensus about what is that color is something that you turn to a database for. Just in regular applications, it is the system of record. We've agreed, we've written down, the couch is blue. We all look at the database and say, the couch is blue because that's what the database says. And I feel for AI, for any agents, for any kind of future, you still need a neutral party that is deterministic for saying, here's what is true.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you can take that one step further with like multi-agent collaboration, right? Where, on some level, if we're two people, two human beings, human agents that are collaborating, right? We need to have this shared state that we serialize through English to each other when we collaborate. That's our collaboration protocol, right? Well, you don't have to, if you're two AI agents collaborating, you don't need to do it that way, right? You can write to the same shared state to collaborate, right? Except then you need to be able to have proper permissions on that and be able to manage that, have a real conflict resolution protocols. All of that is bullseye for what we as database people have been working on for decades.
Yeah, love it. Everyone, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us again. If you want to hear more from Emil, if you haven't seen it yet, I think in about an hour, I'm not sure about the timing, the fireside chat with Emil and Andrew Ng is coming up soon. Definitely catch that. I'll be back later on today. We'll see if you're back or not. It's been great to talk to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.